The morning sun bled crimson across Devil's Canyon as 13-year-old Mary Thompson clawed at the granite wall, her small fingers finding purchase in hairline cracks, while her bare feet scrambled for holds that crumbled beneath her weight. 20 feet below, Sheriff Clayton Burke watched with the patient expression of a man who'd done this before. "Climb all you want, girl." Burke called his voice, carrying the lazy confidence of a predator who knew every escape route. That wall's got maybe 30 feet of handholds before it goes smooth as glass. After that, it's just you and 200 feet of empty air. Mary's heart hammered against her ribs as she pressed herself against the stone, her mother's voice echoing in memory, but not the gentle Sarah Thompson who'd sung lullabies and baked cornbread. This voice was distorted by terror, screaming warnings that mixed with the sound of her own ragged breathing. The cliff face seemed to pulse with malevolent life, each shadow resembling her mother's face, twisted in agony. "Please," Mary whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind. "I won't tell nobody about Mr. Whitman. I promise on Mama's grave." Burke stepped closer to the base of the wall, his weathered boots crunching on loose shale. At 42, he possessed the lean build of a man who'd made violence his profession, and the dead expression of someone who'd found profit in others' pain. His badge caught the morning light like a fallen star, its gleam mocking everything it was supposed to represent. "Your mama's dead, girl," Burke said with casual cruelty. "Been dead these 2 winters. Can't make promises to bones and dust." The words hit Mary like physical blows, and for a moment her grip loosened. In her mind, her mother's gentle face dissolved into the image of Burke standing over Ezra Whitman's corpse, rifling through pockets with mechanical efficiency. The memory played in horrifying detail. Burke's Colt .45 speaking its brutal truth, Whitman crumpling like a discarded doll blood, spreading dark across white fabric. Mary had been hidden behind a boulder at Miller's Creek, gathering wild sage for her father's medicine when the voices drew her attention. She'd watched Burke conduct what appeared to be routine business with the traveling merchant, noting the heavy leather pouch and the beautiful gold pocket watch that played a tinkling melody when opened. The murder had been swift and businesslike. Burke shot Whitman through the heart, then searched the body with practiced thoroughness before dragging it into the brush where scavengers would obscure the evidence. "I seen you kill him," Mary said, finding her voice as she clung to the stone. "I seen you take his gold and that music watch." Burke's pale eyes studied her with calculating coldness. "And what exactly do you plan to do with that information?" "Tell your pa." "Tell the territorial marshal when he comes through next month?" Mary's arms burned with the effort of holding her weight against the cliff face. Her fingers cut by sharp stone left small streaks of blood on the granite. "People will believe me. Mr. Whitman was a good man, and you murdered him for money. People believe what I tell them to believe." Burke replied, pulling out his service revolver and checking the cylinder. "I'm the law in Bitter Creek. My word against yours, and you won't be around to argue your case." With desperate strength born of terror, Mary pulled herself higher up the wall, her torn dress catching on protruding stones. For a moment, hope flared as she found a series of handholds that might lead to a ledge 30 feet above. But Burke had read the cliff face correctly. The holds petered out after 20 feet, leaving her stranded with nowhere to go but down. "Climb down now and I'll make it quick," Burke said, holstering his weapon and reaching for her ankle. "Force me to come up there and you'll learn what slow dying really means." Mary's response was to kick at his reaching hand with her bare foot, catching him across the knuckles hard enough to draw blood. Burke cursed and stumbled backward, his face twisting with rage that replaced his previous casual demeanor. "I should have taken the mercy." Burke snarled, blood streaming from his split knuckles. "Now you've earned the full treatment." He grabbed Mary's ankle with iron strength, his grip crushing small bones as he dragged her down the cliff face. Her fingernails scraped furrows in stone as she fought to maintain purchase. But Burke's weight and leverage made resistance futile. "Mama." Mary whispered, as Burke lifted her struggling form, her voice carrying the desperation of a child who understood she was about to die. "Mama, I tried to be brave like you taught me." The memory of her mother's real voice cut through the terror. Sarah Thompson singing hymns while tending her daughter's scraped knees, teaching Mary that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to do right despite it. "I won't lie for you," Mary said, lifting her chin with desperate defiance, even as Burke held her over the precipice. "I won't be part of your evil." Burke's patience evaporated like morning dew. With casual brutality that spoke of long practice, he hurled the struggling girl into the void, her scream echoing off canyon walls as she plummeted towards certain death. But Mary's desperate grab for the rock face as Burke threw her had altered her trajectory slightly. The capricious gods who govern such things had positioned a narrow ledge 40 feet down a shelf of granite barely wide enough to catch a falling child. The impact drove breath from her lungs and sent lightning through her bones. Pain exploded through her left shoulder and ribs, but consciousness clung to her like a stubborn shadow. Blood seeped from a gash on her forehead, and her left arm hung at an unnatural angle. But she lived. Above, Burke peered into the canyon's depths, distance, and morning shadows, concealing the ledge from his view. Mary's initial scream had given way to silence, and he assumed his problem was solved. Satisfied with his work, he mounted his horse and began the ride back to town, already crafting the story he'd tell her father about tragic accidents and fruitless searches. Mary pressed herself against the stone wall, every breath a symphony of agony. The ledge extended perhaps 8 feet before crumbling into nothingness. Above, the canyon rim might as well have been on the moon. Below, jagged rocks waited with hungry patience. Her left arm was certainly broken, swollen to twice its normal size. Dark bruises spread across her ribs like storm clouds, and blood from her head wound painted dark streaks down her face. But Mary Thompson possessed her mother's stubborn courage, along with her auburn hair, and she refused to surrender to despair. "Papa," she whispered to the empty air, thinking of James Thompson working his hardscrabble claim north of town. Her voice triggered an avalanche of traumatic memories: her mother's death, the lonely nights, the constant fear of being left completely alone in this harsh world. But through the pain and terror, Mary heard something else, the sound of her own voice, calling for help, carrying on wind currents that twisted through hidden passages carved by ancient waters. The sound reached beyond human habitation into territories where different peoples followed older laws and honored different truths. Chief Standing Bear of the Lakota heard the child's cries while leading his hunting party through sacred valleys his ancestors had traveled for generations. At 45, Standing Bear carried the wisdom of countless winters and the strength of a warrior who'd never known defeat. His weathered face bore scars from battles fought to protect his people, and his dark eyes held depths that spoke of both terrible sorrow and unshakable resolve. The hunting party consisted of 12 seasoned warriors following game trails that predated white settlements by centuries. They rode in formation according to ancient custom, and the chief in front, his war leader beside him. Younger warriors flanking experienced hunters who could read sign in stone and wind. War Chief Red Hawk rode alongside Standing Bear, with characteristic skepticism etched into his scarred features. At 38, Red Hawk possessed the lean build of a natural fighter and the suspicious nature of a man who'd lost everything to white expansion. 3 winters passed. Standing Bear's decision to trade with white merchants had led to Red Hawk's son being captured and killed by soldiers who'd followed the trading party back to their camp. The cries come from white territory. Red Hawk said, reining his horse to a halt as Mary's voice echoed across the valley. "Let them solve their own problems." Standing Bear dismounted and walked to the canyon's edge, his trained ear tracking the sound to its source. Below, barely visible on the narrow ledge, a small figure pressed against the stone wall. Even from this distance, he could see the unnatural angle of her arm and the dark stain of blood on her dress. "It's a child," Standing Bear said quietly. A white child. Red Hawk corrected his voice, carrying years of accumulated bitterness. You remember what happened the last time you showed mercy to whites? My son died because of your soft heart. The accusation hung between them like a blade. Standing Bear had indeed decided to trust white traders 3 winters past, believing their promises of peaceful exchange. The decision had led to disaster when soldiers followed the traders back to the Lakota camp, resulting in Red Hawk's son being killed during the fighting that followed. Young Crowfeather, barely 20 and eager to prove himself, leaned forward in his saddle. But she's just a child, Uncle. Surely the spirits would want us to... The spirits want us alive. Red Hawk interrupted sharply. Every act of mercy toward whites brings more soldiers, more death to our people. Dancing Bear, a scarred veteran whose own daughter had died from white man's diseases, spat into the dust. Red Hawk speaks truth. We've saved white children before, only to watch them grow into soldiers who killed our families. Standing Bear studied the girl's precarious position, calculating the difficulty of a rescue attempt. The canyon walls offered few handholds, and any mistake would claim multiple lives. But something in the child's desperate cries spoke to him not just fear, but fierce refusal to surrender, even when death waited below. She reminds me of little Dove, Standing Bear said quietly, referring to his daughter who died of fever 3 winters past. The same courage in the face of darkness. Red Hawk's expression hardened. Your daughter died because you trusted white medicine. Will you risk more lives chasing ghosts? The words struck deep, and Standing Bear felt the familiar weight of leadership settle on his shoulders. Every decision carried consequences that rippled through his people's lives. But abandoning the child would violate the warrior code that gave meaning to existence. I won't order any man to risk his life for this, Standing Bear announced, beginning to untie rope from his saddle. But neither will I ride away and pretend I didn't hear her cries. Red Hawk's jaw tightened. And when white soldiers come looking, when they find Lakota tracks near the canyon, will your honor protect our women and children from their bullets? We face that when it comes. Standing Bear replied, testing the rope's strength. But we don't abandon children to die regardless of their blood. Several warriors moved to help, while others shook their heads in disapproval. The division in the hunting party reflected deeper tensions within the tribe between those who sought accommodation with whites and those who favored resistance. Crowfeather volunteered to assist, eager to prove his courage. Swift Arrow and Dancing Bear also stepped forward, their respect for Standing Bear outweighing their reservations. Red Hawk remained motionless, his silence more eloquent than any speech. Standing Bear secured the rope around a sturdy pine and prepared for the descent. Below, Mary had stopped crying, either from exhaustion or growing weakness. The silence was more ominous than her previous cries, a sign that time was running out. Watch the approaches. Standing Bear instructed the warriors remaining above. If white men come, signal immediately. He swung over the canyon rim and began his descent, carrying the weight of his people's future along with his own conscience. The rope burned against his palms, despite deer-hide gloves and wind gusts threatened to slam him against the canyon wall. Below, Mary watched his approach with growing hope, tempered by delirium from blood loss and shock. The sight of the Lakota warrior descending toward her should have been terrifying. She'd heard stories of Indian raids and savage violence all her life. But something in his dark eyes spoke of protection rather than threat. Hold on, little one. Standing Bear called in English, his accent thick but understandable. Help comes to those who refuse to surrender. Mary tried to respond, but her voice emerged as barely a whisper. Her injuries had worsened during the time alone. The broken arm had swollen grotesquely, and her breathing came in shallow gasps that suggested internal damage. As Standing Bear reached the ledge, his warrior's eye assessed her condition with practiced efficiency. The arm needed immediate splinting, and possible internal injuries made any movement dangerous. Most concerning was the glassy quality of her gaze, signs of serious head trauma that could prove fatal. "My name is Standing Bear," he said gently, settling beside her on the narrow shelf. "What are you called?" "Mary Thompson," she whispered, her voice carrying the precision of someone fighting to remain conscious. "My papa's got a claim north of Bitter Creek." Standing Bear examined the ledge and formulated a rescue plan. The stone appeared stable enough to support their combined weight, but the ascent would require careful coordination. Mary's injuries made the climb exponentially more dangerous. Above, Red Hawk's sharp whistle cut through morning air, the signal for approaching riders. Standing Bear pressed himself against the canyon wall and looked up where his warriors had already concealed themselves among the rocks. Sheriff Burke appeared at the canyon rim, accompanied by Deputy Marshal Pete Hawkins and James Thompson. Mary's father looked haggard with worry, his clothes disheveled from a night of desperate searching. His weathered face bore the haunted expression of a man who'd already lost his wife and now feared losing his only child. "No, found her tracks leading to the canyon," Burke announced with practiced authority. "Ground's been unstable after those spring rains. Looks like she was picking berries when it gave way." James Thompson stared into the abyss where he believed his daughter lay dead, his shoulders shaking with suppressed sobs. She knew better than to play near edges. Sarah always warned her about dangerous places. "The children don't always listen," Burke said with false sympathy, placing a seemingly comforting hand on the grieving father's shoulder. "Tragic accident, but nothing anyone could have prevented." Deputy Hawkins examined the area with unwelcome thoroughness, his sharp eyes reading signs in disturbed earth and broken vegetation. Something about the scene troubled his detective instincts. The evidence suggested a different story than Burke's official version. A lot of scuff marks for a simple fall. Hawkins observed, kneeling to study the ground. "Almost like there was a struggle up here." Burke's expression didn't change, but his hand drifted toward his holster. "Girl probably panicked when the ground started giving way. Natural she'd fight for purchase." Below, Standing Bear heard every word and understood the deadly game being played above. Burke wasn't searching for Mary, he was confirming her death and establishing his false narrative. The sheriff's presence transformed the rescue from dangerous to potentially suicidal. Mary stirred against Standing Bear's shoulder, her fever making her delirious. "He killed the man with the golden watch." She mumbled, her voice barely audible, but carrying in the canyon's acoustics. "Shot him dead for his money." Standing Bear's blood chilled as the implications became clear. This wasn't a simple accident. Mary had witnessed murder, and Burke intended to silence her permanently. The sheriff wasn't just corrupt. He was a killer protecting his crimes. Above, the search party began to disperse. But Hawkins lingered, his instincts troubled by inconsistencies. James Thompson remained at the rim, his grief a palpable presence in the morning air. "I should have watched her closer," James whispered. "Should have known she'd wander off exploring." "Couldn't have prevented this," Burke replied, his tone lacking conviction. "Best we can do now is pray for her soul." As voices faded, Standing Bear faced an impossible choice. The original plan, rescue the girl and return her to town, would deliver her directly into Burke's hands. But keeping her would brand him as a kidnapper. Mary's breathing grew more labored, each inhalation a struggle against pain and approaching unconsciousness. Her small hand gripped Standing Bear's wrist with surprising strength, and her green eyes focused on his face with startling clarity. "Don't take me back," she whispered urgently. "He'll kill me for sure if you take me back to him." Standing Bear made his decision with the certainty of a man who'd chosen honor over safety countless times before. The ascent would be treacherous, but leaving the child to die violated every principle that made life worth living. The climb took nearly an hour, with Standing Bear supporting Mary's weight while managing his own ascent. Crow Feather and Swift Arrow provided assistance from above their strong arms, pulling both climber and burden to safety. Mary lost consciousness, halfway up her body going limp in Standing Bear's careful grip. Red Hawk waited at the top with barely contained anger. The sheriff already confirmed her death. If she disappears now, they'll blame us. She didn't fall, Standing Bear replied grimly, laying Mary on a blanket Swift Arrow had spread. She was thrown. The revelation struck the warriors like physical blows. Accidental death was tragedy. Deliberate murder demanded response. Even Red Hawk's expression shifted as he processed the implications. The white sheriff tried to kill one of his own people, Dancing Bear asked. Standing Bear examined Mary's injuries in full daylight, noting details that confirmed his suspicions. The bruises on her arm matched fingerprints evidence of being grabbed and lifted. Her torn dress suggested violent struggle. Most telling were rope burns on her wrists, barely visible but unmistakably fresh. She witnessed something, Standing Bear said. He tried to silence her permanently. Swift Arrow checked their back trail. What do we do with her? She needs medicine we don't have. Red Hawk's answer came sharp. Leave her. Taking her only brings soldiers. But Mary stirred in Standing Bear's arms, her eyes focusing with startling clarity, despite obvious pain. When she spoke, her voice carried the precise detail of someone who'd witnessed horror. He buried them by the mill, she whispered, gripping Standing Bear's wrist. All of them. The Golden Watchman and lots of others. Under the crooked tree where the water bends. The words hung in desert air like tolling bells. Standing Bear felt terrible clarity settle in his chest, the understanding that preceded necessary violence. How many others? He asked gently. Don't know exactly. Mary replied, her child's voice carrying horrible knowledge. But I seen him digging there. Always digging new holes when he thought nobody was watching. Red Hawk's skepticism evaporated as implications crystallized. A killing ground. Mary's voice grew stronger despite her injuries. The Golden Watch played music when you opened it. Pretty music like Mama used to sing. He took it off the dead man like it was a prize. Swift Arrow made the connection. That merchant from St. Louis Whitman. He carried a gold pocket watch. Burke claimed he never came through town. The warriors exchanged grim looks as the pattern became clear. Burke controlled information flowing through Bitter Creek, deciding which travelers arrived safely and which simply vanished. He uses Indian raids as cover. Mary continued. Blames his murders on your people. Says savage attacks explain why folks disappear. The final piece fell into place with sickening logic. Burke had been using racial hatred as camouflage, blaming systematic murders on Indian violence, while building his reputation as civilization's protector. He keeps trophies in his office, Mary added. Watches and rings and hair, braids cut from dead people. The revelation struck the warriors like physical blows. Burke hadn't just been framing Indians. He'd been murdering Lakota warriors and taking scalps as false proof of heroism. How many of our people? Red Hawk asked, his hand moving to his knife. I don't know, Mary admitted. But the smell in his office, like old death mixed with tobacco. Standing Bear processed this information with methodical precision. Burke's crimes weren't just against white travelers. He'd been systematically murdering Lakota hunting parties, then displaying their hair as trophies. The warriors who never returned, Swift Arrow said quietly. We blamed bad weather or enemy tribes, Dancing Bear added. Red Hawk's worldview shifted as he realized the implications. The hatred between whites and Indians that he'd accepted as natural was actually manufactured, created by Burke's systematic deception. He's been playing both sides, Red Hawk said, dawning horror in his voice. Standing Bear looked at Mary with new understanding. This injured child held the key to justice for dozens of murdered people, and potentially the end of artificial hatred Burke had worked to perpetuate. Mary's eyes began to flutter closed, exhaustion overwhelming her brief clarity. Don't let him hurt Papa, she whispered. He said accidents happen to whole families. The threat against James Thompson crystallized Standing Bear's resolve. This wasn't just about one child. It was about stopping a monster who turned an entire territory into his hunting ground. We take her to safety. Standing Bear decided. All of us. Red Hawk studied his chief's face and recognized the expression and the same look Standing Bear had worn before leading them into impossible battles. The whole band, every warrior who can ride Standing Bear, confirmed. This child's testimony could expose truth that brings peace between our peoples. As if summoned by his words, dust clouds appeared on the horizon, riders approaching fast from Bitter Creek's direction. Burke had discovered something that transformed his casual confidence into urgent pursuit. The approaching dust resolved into a military formation, 30 cavalry soldiers led by General Marcus Harrison, a career officer whose silver beard and steel-gray eyes spoke of decades fighting frontier wars. Burke rode beside him, his face animated with righteous indignation as he spun his web of lies. Found clear evidence of kidnapping. Burke was saying, his voice carrying across desert air. Lakota war party at least a dozen strong. They took the Thompson girl alive, probably planning to ransom her. General Harrison's expression remained skeptical. At 58, he'd heard too many frontier stories that didn't align with physical evidence. You're certain she was taken, could have simply fallen like you first reported. The new evidence changed everything. Burke lied smoothly. Rope marks on the canyon wall, fresh horse tracks leading north. They've been planning this for weeks, General. Opening move in a coordinated uprising. Standing Bear heard every word from his concealed position, understanding how Burke's accusations would transform their rescue mission into an act of war. Mary stirred in his arms, her fever making her delirious. The music box, she mumbled, her voice carrying farther than intended. Pretty music for Mama. Her words reached the lead cavalry scout, Joseph Crow Dog, a mixed-blood tracker who'd served with Harrison for 5 years. His head snapped toward the sound eyes, scanning rocks where Standing Bear's party lay hidden. "He heard something, sir," Crow Dog reported. "Child's voice coming from those boulders." Burke's hand moved toward his holster, but he controlled the gesture. "Could be a trap. Indians use children as bait." General Harrison raised his hand for silence, his trained ear picking up Mary's continued mumblings. The voice was definitely that of a young girl speaking English with a local accent. "That's no war cry," Harrison observed. "Sounds like genuine distress. All the more reason for caution." Burke insisted, sweat beading despite cool morning air. "Wounded bait is more convincing." Standing Bear faced impossible tactical odds. His 12 warriors couldn't fight 30 cavalry soldiers while protecting an injured child. But revealing themselves meant delivering Mary back to Burke, a death sentence disguised as rescue. Red Hawk crawled close enough to whisper, "We can fade back into the canyon maze, lose them in the passages. She won't survive another night." Standing Bear replied with absolute certainty. "And Burke will finish what he started." Above, General Harrison dismounted and began careful approach to the rock formation, his service revolver drawn but not aimed. 20 years of frontier service had taught him to read situations carefully, and something about Burke's increasing agitation suggested incomplete truth. "This is General Harrison, United States Army," he called out. "If there's a child up there, I'm here to help. You have my word, no harm will come to you." Burke hung back, his face pale beneath his hat brim. The last thing he needed was Mary telling her story to a military officer with authority to investigate. Mary's voice grew stronger as consciousness returned. "General, please help me. I'm hurt real bad." "Where are you hurt, child?" Harrison called back, his tone gentling. "My arm's broken," Mary replied clearly. "And my ribs hurt something fierce. The sheriff threw me off the cliff, but the Indian chief saved me." Burke's blood turned to ice. The child was not only alive, but coherent, and her accusation would destroy everything he'd built. She's delirious from the fall, Burke called desperately. Head injuries cause fantasies. Poor thing probably doesn't know her own name. But Harrison had fought enough battles to recognize truth. The child's voice held clarity despite obvious injury, and her accusation carried specific detail rather than fever-induced rambling. "What's your name, child?" Harrison asked, moving closer while keeping his weapon ready. "Mary Thompson," she replied without hesitation. "Daughter of James Thompson, homesteader north of Bitter Creek. My mama was Sarah Thompson, died birthing my baby brother 2 winters back." The precise personal details convinced Harrison that the girl's mind was functioning clearly. "And you say the sheriff threw you off the cliff?" "Yes, sir," Mary replied with absolute conviction. "I saw him kill Mr. Whitman from St. Louis, the man with the golden watch that plays music. Sheriff Burke shot him dead and buried him by the old mill." The words hit Burke like physical blows, each syllable threatening to topple his carefully constructed lies. Everything he'd spent years building hung by the thread of one stubborn child's survival. "She's raving," Burke said desperately. "Probably doesn't even remember what happened." "I remember everything," Mary called out clearly, "including the rope burns on my wrists where he tied me up before throwing me off Devil's Canyon." Harrison holstered his weapon, convinced by the child's lucid testimony and Burke's increasing desperation. "Where exactly are you? I can hear you but can't see you." Standing Bear made his choice, a decision that would determine not just Mary's fate, but the future relationship between his people and white authorities. He stood slowly, hands visible and empty. Mary cradled carefully in his arms. "I am Standing Bear of the Lakota," he announced in clear English. "This child was thrown from the canyon and left to die. I heard her cries and rescued her from the ledge where she clung to life." Harrison's hand moved toward his weapon, then stopped as he processed the scene. The Lakota chief stood protectively over the injured girl, his warriors arrayed behind him, with weapons sheathed but ready. This looked nothing like a kidnapping. It looked like a rescue. "You saved her from the canyon?" Harrison asked carefully. "I saved her from certain death." Standing Bear corrected his dark eyes, meeting the general's with unflinching honesty. "The white sheriff threw her into the void. She lives only by courage and the Great Spirit's protection." Burke saw his narrative crumbling. "Don't listen to him, General. Savages lie easily. He probably threw her off himself, then rescued her to look heroic." But Mary's voice cut through Burke's desperation. "Chief Standing Bear saved my life. Sheriff Burke tried to murder me to hide his crimes. He's got a whole graveyard of people he's killed." Harrison studied the tableau with growing understanding. The Lakota chief's protective stance contradicted every assumption about savage kidnappers, while Burke's desperate lies suggested guilt rather than righteous anger. Deputy Hawkins had been quietly observing his detective instincts, noting inconsistencies in Burke's story. Now he spoke with uncomfortable questions. "Sheriff, how'd the girl end up with rope burns if she fell accidentally?" Burke's face went ashen as he realized Hawkins had been paying closer attention than expected. "She's confused. Head injuries cause—" "I'm not confused," Mary interrupted. "Deputy Hawkins checks Sheriff Burke's office. He keeps trophies from murdered people, hair and jewelry and watches. And check by the mill where the water bends, that's where he buries the bodies." The specific verifiable details struck Harrison like revelation. This wasn't concussed rambling, it was coherent testimony from someone who'd witnessed systematic murder. "Sergeant Morrison," Harrison called to his second-in-command. "Take a detail to this mill location. Look for disturbed ground." "General, that's a waste of time," Burke protested. "Sheriff Burke, Napukur," Harrison said with military authority. "You'll accompany Sergeant Morrison to verify the child's claims." Burke realized his only remaining option was violence, eliminate the witnesses, before they could testify further. But as his hand dropped toward his holster, Deputy Hawkins made an unexpected decision that would change everything. Instead of supporting his superior, Hawkins drew his own weapon and aimed it at Burke. For a moment, it seemed he was following Burke's lead, but then his gun swung toward Mary. "Sorry, kid," Hawkins said quietly, his finger tightening on the trigger. "Nothing personal, but there's too much money at stake here." The betrayal hit like lightning. Hawkins wasn't Burke's unwitting deputy, he was a full partner in the criminal conspiracy, and he'd been waiting for the perfect moment to eliminate all witnesses while making it look like Indian violence. Standing Bear saw the gun's movement and threw himself sideways, shielding Mary with his body as Hawkins fired. The bullet meant for the girl's heart instead struck Standing Bear in the shoulder, spinning him around, but not dropping him. "Now both of them!" Burke shouted, pulling his own weapon. "Kill them both and blame it on the savages." But Red Hawk had been watching the white men with warrior's instincts. His tomahawk flew through the air with deadly precision, striking Hawkins in the chest and dropping him before he could fire again. Burke's second shot went wild as multiple hands seized him, dragging him to the ground where he writhed and cursed like a trapped animal, but even captured his face twisted with a final desperate inspiration. "You want the truth." Burke laughed with the sound of a man who'd lost everything. "I'll give you truth that'll burn this territory to the ground. You think Hawkins and I worked alone." General Harrison felt the ground shift beneath him as he realized the implications. How high does this conspiracy go? "High enough to reach your own chain of command." Burke replied with venomous satisfaction. "You think Colonel Morrison assigned you to this backwater posting by accident. You were getting too close to the truth about missing supply trains." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Harrison had been investigating disappearances of military supplies following a trail that led toward Bitter Creek. His reassignment hadn't been routine, it had been the conspiracy's way of neutralizing a threat. "Names," Harrison demanded, but Burke's cooperation came with conditions. "Safe passage out of the territory," Burke countered. "Full pardon, and I'll give you every name, every connection." Mary, despite her injuries and pain, spoke up with startling clarity. "Don't make deals with him, General. He's a liar and a killer. Whatever he tells you will just be more lies." Burke's eyes fixed on Mary with murderous hatred. "You should have died quiet, girl. Now you've ruined everything." But before anyone could respond, then the sound of approaching hoofbeats announced new arrivals. James Thompson rode into view, accompanied by several townspeople who joined the search. The homesteader's face transformed from grief to amazement as he saw Mary alive. "Mary," James cried, dismounting and rushing toward his daughter. "Dear God, I thought you were dead." "Papa." Mary sobbed, reaching out with her good arm as tears streamed down her face. "I'm sorry I went wandering. I'm sorry I caused trouble." "Hush now," James whispered, gathering his daughter carefully. "You're alive, and that's all that matters." The reunion provided the distraction Burke needed. Using the emotional moment to his advantage, he'd managed to work his bonds loose and now lunged toward a nearby cavalry horse. His movement caught everyone by surprise, and for a moment it seemed he might actually escape. But Red Hawk had been watching Burke with unblinking attention. The war chief's second tomahawk flew through the air with deadly precision, striking Burke in the back of the leg and dropping him to the ground in a writhing heap. "And no one escapes justice," Red Hawk said grimly. "Not after what he's done to our people." General Harrison quickly secured Burke with iron shackles, then turned his attention to the broader implications of the conspiracy. "Sergeant Morrison, I want every document in Burke's office seized as evidence. And send word to Fort Collins, we need investigators who aren't connected to the local command structure." As Morrison organized the evidence-gathering mission, Mary found strength to provide more detailed testimony about Burke's crimes. Despite her injuries, her memory remained crystal clear about what she'd witnessed. "There's a loose floorboard in his office," Mary said, her voice carrying clearly, despite exhaustion. Third plank from the window. That's where he keeps the special things, the hair he cut from murdered people and the jewelry he couldn't sell. The investigation that followed revealed the full scope of Burke's criminal enterprise. Morrison's search of the sheriff's office uncovered exactly what Mary had described. Trophies from dozens of victims, detailed records of murders stretching back 8 years, and correspondence that implicated officials throughout the territorial government. The mill site excavation proved equally damning, revealing 39 graves containing the remains of traveler settlers and Lakota warriors. Each burial showed signs of systematic murder, disguised as accidents or Indian raids. Burke's confession, extracted during interrogation, exposed a criminal network reaching into the highest levels of territorial authority. Judges who'd dismissed investigations, army officers who'd misdirected searches, politicians who'd blocked federal oversight, all documented in his meticulous records. The revelations sparked congressional hearings that ultimately led to sweeping reforms in territorial governance. Burke's systematic deception had nearly succeeded in creating permanent warfare between whites and Indians. But the courage of a 13-year-old girl and a Lakota chief had exposed the truth. Mary's recovery took several weeks, during which Standing Bear visited daily despite his own shoulder wound. Their friendship became a symbol of what was possible when people chose understanding over hatred. "Why did you really save me?" Mary asked during one conversation. "You could have ridden away, and nobody would have blamed you." Standing Bear considered the question thoughtfully. "Because abandoning you would have made me less than human, and because my daughter Little Dove would have wanted me to save another child in need." The sound of gunfire still made Mary flinch, a reminder of trauma that would take time to heal. Sunsets painted in red reminded her of Devil's Canyon, and sometimes she woke screaming from nightmares where Burke's pale eyes stared at her from the darkness. But with each passing day, the memories lost some of their power to terrorize. Standing Bear understood trauma in ways that white doctors couldn't. During one of his visits, he taught Mary a Lakota breathing technique used by warriors to calm their spirits after battle. "Fear is like smoke from a dying fire," he explained, demonstrating the slow, rhythmic breathing. "If you feed it with panic, it grows stronger. But if you breathe steadily and remember your courage, it fades to nothing." Mary practiced the technique daily, finding that it helped when the memories threatened to overwhelm her. She also discovered that talking about her experience, telling the truth repeatedly to investigators and reporters, gradually reduced its power to hurt her. Red Hawk's transformation proved equally significant. Witnessing the evidence of Burke's manipulation, the war chief became an advocate for peace between tribes and settlers. His changed perspective influenced other warriors who'd lost family members to manufactured conflicts. "All these years we believed the hatred was natural," Red Hawk observed during peace negotiations. "We never suspected it was created by one evil man's lies and greed." The treaty signed between Standing Bear's band and the territorial government became a model for future agreements based on mutual respect rather than coercion. The document included unprecedented provisions for cooperation in law enforcement and shared responsibility for protecting travelers through the territory. Mary played a role in these negotiations despite her youth, her moral authority as Burke's intended victim giving weight to her advocacy for peace. "I almost died because one evil man wanted Indians and whites to hate each other," she testified before the territorial legislature. "Don't let his poison keep working after he's dead." Burke himself was eventually hanged for his crimes, but not before his testimony led to the arrest of dozens of co-conspirators throughout the territorial government. His execution drew crowds from across the territory, including both white settlers and Lakota warriors, who'd lost family members to his systematic deception. Mary attended the execution carrying a small wooden box that contained one of her mother's hair ribbons, a reminder of the innocent lives Burke had destroyed. She stood silent as the trap door opened, feeling not satisfaction, but a profound sense of closure. "This is for everyone who couldn't be here to see justice done," Mary whispered as Burke's body swung from the gallows. All the people he murdered, both white and Indian. They got their peace today. The friendship between Mary and Standing Bear continued long after the immediate crisis passed. They corresponded regularly, with Mary learning to write simple phrases in Lakota, while Standing Bear improved his English through their exchanges. When the time came for Standing Bear's band to return to their traditional territories for the winter, Mary knew their daily visits would end. The parting would be difficult, but she wanted to give him something that would carry part of her spirit with him. On their last day together, Mary presented Standing Bear with a small leather pouch containing a braid of her mother's hair, auburn like her own, carefully preserved since Sarah Thompson's death. The gift represented the most precious thing she possessed, and giving it away required the same courage she'd shown on Devil's Canyon. "Mama would want you to have this," Mary said, her voice thick with emotion. "She always said a mother's love protects her children even after she's gone. Maybe it'll protect you too." Standing Bear accepted the gift with the reverence it deserved, understanding the magnitude of Mary's gesture. In Lakota tradition, hair carried spiritual significance, and Mary was essentially sharing her mother's spirit with him. "I will carry this with honor." Standing Bear promised, securing the pouch inside his medicine bundle. "Your mother's spirit will ride with me, and through it, you will always be part of my family." The farewell ceremony took place at sunset, with representatives from both communities present to honor the bond between Mary and Standing Bear. General Harrison presented the Lakota chief with a Medal of Commendation, the first ever awarded to a Native American by the territorial government. But the moment that would live in memory belonged to Mary and Standing Bear's final embrace. The 14-year-old girl and the 45-year-old warrior held each other like family, their friendship having transcended every artificial barrier Burke had tried to construct. "Remember?" Standing Bear whispered in her ear. "Honor doesn't see the color of skin, only the courage of heart." Mary nodded, tears streaming down her face. She fought to memorize every detail of his weathered features. "I'll remember, and I'll teach others to remember too." As the Lakota band rode into the gathering darkness, their horses' hoofbeats gradually fading into silence, Mary remained on the porch of the territorial office where the ceremonies had taken place. The events of the past year had aged her beyond her years, but they'd also given her a voice that would echo through history. James Thompson put his arm around his daughter's shoulders, marveling at her transformation from frightened child to young advocate for justice and peace. Burke's attempt to silence her had instead amplified her voice beyond anything the corrupt sheriff could have imagined. "What happens now?" James asked, echoing a question Mary had posed months earlier. Mary considered the question with characteristic seriousness, her hand moving instinctively to touch the spot where her mother's hair ribbon had rested in the wooden box she'd given to Standing Bear. The gesture brought comfort, even as it reminded her of loss. "Now we build something better," she said simply. "Every time someone tries to make us hate people because they're different, we remember that Chief Standing Bear risked everything to save my life. We remember that evil thrives when good people do nothing." The territorial capital published Mary's story as part of its official record documenting how hatred and fear could be weaponized by corrupt individuals, and how courage and compassion could overcome the deepest divisions. Her testimony helped establish new legal precedents for protecting witnesses and investigating official corruption. Standing Bear's treaty with the federal government became a template for future negotiations, proving that mutual respect could replace mutual destruction. His band prospered in their traditional hunting grounds, while his friendship with General Harrison opened unprecedented channels of communication between military and tribal leadership. Years later, when historians studied the transformation of the Western Territories from lawless frontiers to stable communities, they would point to Burke's exposure as a crucial turning point. One man's systematic campaign of murder and deception had nearly succeeded in creating permanent racial warfare. But the courage of a 13-year-old girl and a Lakota chief had stopped him. The town of Bitter Creek slowly healed from Burke's poisonous influence, though the process required years of patient work by people of goodwill on all sides. Some residents remained suspicious of change, clinging to old prejudices even after Burke's crimes were exposed. But gradually, the truth prevailed over manufactured hatred. Mary grew into young womanhood, carrying the lessons she'd learned from her ordeal. Despite the lingering effects of trauma, the way her heart still raced when she heard unexpected gunshots, so the nightmares that sometimes visited during thunderstorms, she refused to let fear define her future. When she turned 18, Mary used part of the compensation money from Burke's recovered assets to establish a school that welcomed children of all backgrounds. The institution became a model for integrated education, teaching students that diversity strengthened rather than threatened their community. James Thompson lived to see his daughter become a respected educator and advocate for peaceful coexistence. His pride in Mary's courage and wisdom helped heal the wounds left by his wife's death and his daughter's near murder. Standing Bear aged into respected elder status, his rescue of Mary Thompson becoming legend in Lakota oral tradition. The story was told around campfires as proof that honor transcended all artificial boundaries, inspiring new generations of warriors to choose courage over hatred. Red Hawk's transformation from war chief to peace advocate influenced tribal politics throughout the region. His personal journey from hatred to understanding demonstrated that even the deepest wounds could heal when truth replaced deception. The correspondence between Mary and Standing Bear continued for decades, their letters preserved by both families as testament to friendship that transcended racial boundaries. When Standing Bear finally passed away at the age of 73, Mary attended his funeral, one of the few whites ever honored with such an invitation. At the ceremony conducted according to ancient Lakota traditions, Mary spoke briefly about the man who'd saved her life and changed her understanding of humanity. Her words, translated into Lakota by Red Hawk, brought tears to warriors who'd known Standing Bear since childhood. He taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the decision to do right despite fear. Mary said, her adult voice carrying the same clear conviction it had possessed at 13. He showed me that honor knows no boundaries of race or culture. After the funeral, Red Hawk presented Mary with Standing Bear's medicine bundle, which still contained the pouch holding her mother's hair. The gesture represented the highest honor Lakota culture could bestow on an outsider recognition as family. He said this should return to you when his journey ended. Red Hawk explained. He carried your mother's spirit with him for 30 years, and it gave him strength in difficult times. Mary accepted the bundle with reverence, understanding that she now carried responsibility for preserving Standing Bear's memory, along with her mother's. The circle had completed itself in ways she never could have imagined as a terrified 13-year-old clinging to a ledge in Devil's Canyon. Years passed, and Mary became a grandmother herself, telling her children's children about the Lakota chief who'd risked everything to save a white girl's life. The story became part of family tradition, passed down through generations as proof that good could triumph over evil when people of courage chose to act. When Mary finally passed away, at the age of 87, her funeral drew mourners from across the territory and beyond. Lakota warriors rode hundreds of miles to pay their respects, their presence a testament to the bridge she'd helped build between peoples. The golden pocket watch that had belonged to Ezra Whitman was donated to the Territorial Museum after Mary's death, where it played its cheerful melody for visitors who came to learn about Burke's crimes and their exposure. But the watch's significance extended beyond its connection to murder. It had become a symbol of justice served and peace achieved. In the museum's permanent exhibit about frontier justice, Mary's story occupied a place of honor alongside artifacts from Burke's criminal network. Visitors could see the rope he'd used to bind her wrists, the derringer he'd tried to kill her with, and the detailed records he'd kept of his systematic murders. But the exhibit's most powerful element was a simple display case containing two items: Standing Bear's tomahawk, donated by Red Hawk's grandson, and a child's torn calico dress, Mary's dress, from that terrible morning at Devil's Canyon. Together, they told a story of courage triumphing over evil, of friendship transcending racial hatred, and of truth eventually prevailing over deception. The inscription beneath the display read, "In memory of all those who died at the hands of corruption and in honor of those who risked everything to expose the truth. May their courage inspire future generations to choose justice over convenience, understanding over hatred, and honor over personal gain." Standing Bear's words, carved in both English and Lakota, formed the exhibit's conclusion: honor doesn't see the color of skin, only the courage of heart. The museum became a pilgrimage site for people seeking to understand how individual courage could overcome institutional evil. Mary's story resonated across generations, proving that even the smallest voices could carry the most important truths when backed by unshakable conviction. And sometimes, late in the evening when the museum was closed and shadows gathered in the display cases, visitors claimed they could hear the faint sound of Ezra Whitman's pocket watch playing its gentle melody. Not a song of sorrow, but a hymn of justice finally served and peace finally won. The friendship between a 13-year-old pioneer girl and a Lakota war chief had literally changed history-breaking cycles of hatred that could have consumed the American frontier for generations. Their bond, forged in the crucible of shared danger and mutual respect, proved that the human capacity for good could always triumph over evil if people of courage were willing to stand up and be counted when darkness threatened to prevail. In the end, Mary Thompson's refusal to be silenced had saved far more than her own life. It had exposed a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of territorial government, brought justice to dozens of murder victims, and created possibilities for peace between peoples who'd been taught to hate each other. Her courage in the face of ultimate evil had literally changed the world one honest word at a time. The friendship between a 13-year-old pioneer girl and a Lakota war chief had literally changed history, breaking cycles of hatred that could have consumed the American frontier for generations. Their bond, forged in the crucible of shared danger and mutual respect, proved that the human capacity for good could always triumph over evil if people of courage were willing to stand up and be counted when darkness threatened to prevail. In the end, Mary Thompson's refusal to be silenced had saved far more than her own life. It had exposed a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of territorial government, brought justice to dozens of murder victims, and created possibilities for peace between peoples who'd been taught to hate each other. Her courage in the face of ultimate evil had literally changed the world one honest word at a time. 50 years after Burke's execution, the territory had transformed into a prosperous state where the descendants of settlers and Native Americans worked together in ways their ancestors could never have imagined. The schools Mary had established had grown into a network of integrated institutions that served as models for the rest of the nation. Her educational philosophy, that understanding conquered fear and knowledge defeated prejudice, had shaped an entire generation of leaders. The treaty Standing Bear had negotiated became the foundation for a unique form of governance that included Native American representation in state government. His vision of cooperation, rather than conquest, had proven more durable than the military solutions that had failed in other territories. The Lakota reservation, established under his leadership, remained largely autonomous, with its people prospering through a combination of traditional practices and modern commerce. Red Hawk's son, born years after his father's transformation from war chief and a peace advocate, became the first Native American elected to the state legislature. His inaugural speech quoted both his father and Mary Thompson, weaving together Lakota wisdom and pioneer determination in ways that would have been unthinkable during Burke's reign of terror. "My father taught me that hatred was a choice," the younger Red Hawk said to the assembled lawmakers. Mary Thompson taught him that courage was also a choice. "Today we choose to build rather than destroy, to unite rather than divide to honor the memory of those who died by ensuring their sacrifice created something beautiful. The old tensions hadn't disappeared entirely. Human nature remained complex, and fear of the other still lurked in some hearts. But the institutional changes Burke's exposure had triggered created frameworks for addressing conflicts through law rather than violence. When disputes arose between communities, they were settled in courts that included judges from both cultures applying principles of justice that transcended racial boundaries. General Harrison, now retired, and living in the state capital, often visited the museum where Mary's story was preserved. At 83, he could still remember the moment he first heard her voice calling from the rocks at Devil's Canyon, and the way it had changed his understanding of what was possible on the frontier. She was just a child, Harrison would tell visitors who recognized him. But she had the moral courage of a seasoned warrior. Standing Bear saw that quality in her, and it inspired him to risks that seemed impossible at the time. Together, they proved that individual acts of courage could reshape entire societies. The museum had expanded over the years, adding wings dedicated to frontier justice, Native American culture, and the gradual integration of diverse communities. But the original exhibit remained unchanged: Mary's torn dress, Standing Bear's tomahawk, and Ezra Whitman's musical pocket watch, silent witnesses to a moment when evil had been confronted and defeated by the unlikely alliance of a 13-year-old girl and a Lakota chief. On the anniversary of Burke's execution, people from across the state gathered at Devil's Canyon for a ceremony that honored both the victims of his crimes and the courage of those who had exposed them. The narrow ledge where Mary had clung to life was now marked with a bronze plaque that bore her words: "Truth might hurt for a while, but lies hurt forever." Standing Bear's gravesite, located on a hill overlooking the canyon, had become a pilgrimage destination for people seeking inspiration in their own struggles against injustice. The simple stone marker bore no elaborate inscription, just his name, his dates, and the words that had defined his life. Honor doesn't see the color of skin, only the courage of heart. Mary's grave in the Pioneer Cemetery outside Bitter Creek lay beneath a spreading oak tree she had planted herself as a young woman. The tree's roots had grown deep into soil that had once been stained with Burke's victims' blood, but now nourished new life. Visitors often left wildflowers there, and sometimes when the wind was just right, they claimed they could hear the faint sound of a music box playing a gentle melody. The correspondence between Mary and Standing Bear, preserved in the state archives, had become required reading in schools throughout the region. Their letters revealed the gradual development of mutual respect and understanding, showing how two people from different worlds had found common ground in their shared commitment to justice and truth. One letter written by Mary when she was 25 and Standing Bear was 55 captured the essence of their relationship. "You saved my life that day at Devil's Canyon. But more than that, you saved my faith in humanity. You showed me that goodness could triumph over evil, that courage could overcome fear, and that honor knew no boundaries of race or culture. I carry those lessons with me every day, and I hope to pass them on to my children and my children's children." Standing Bear's response, dictated to a tribal scribe because his English writing skills remained limited, was equally moving. "Little warrior, you gave me something more precious than life. You gave me hope. When I pulled you from that ledge, I thought I was saving one child. But you saved an entire people from the poison of hatred. You proved that white hearts could beat with the same rhythm as Lakota hearts, that courage was not the possession of any one race, but the birthright of all humanity." The final letter in their correspondence, written shortly before Standing Bear's death, contained a prophecy that had proven remarkably accurate. "The changes we began will outlive us both. The children growing up in this new world will know cooperation where we knew only conflict. They will build bridges where we saw only chasms. Our sacrifice, your suffering, and my risk will bear fruit in generations yet unborn. As the 19th century gave way to the 20th, the state that had emerged from the ashes of Burke's criminal empire became a beacon of hope for other regions struggling with racial tensions. Delegations from across the nation came to study the Bitter Creek model, the unique system of integrated governance and cooperative law enforcement that had emerged from the crisis. Mary's educational philosophy had evolved into a comprehensive approach to multicultural learning that was being adopted by schools from coast to coast. Her insight that prejudice thrived on ignorance while understanding flourished through knowledge had proven timeless. The textbooks she had helped write, incorporating both pioneer and Native American perspectives on frontier history, challenged students to see events through multiple lenses. The economic prosperity that followed the end of racial conflict had surprised even optimistic observers. Trade between Native American communities and settler towns had created new forms of commerce that benefited everyone. Lakota craftsmanship found eager markets in eastern cities, while Native American agricultural techniques improved crop yields for pioneer farmers. The cooperation that had seemed impossible during Burke's reign of terror had proven not just morally right, but economically advantageous. But perhaps the most significant change was harder to measure: the transformation in how people saw each other. Children who grew up in integrated schools learning from both white and Native American teachers developed a natural comfort with diversity that their parents had never known. For them, the idea that people should be judged by their character rather than their appearance was simply common sense. The story of Mary Thompson and Standing Bear had become more than history. It had become mythology, a foundational narrative that shaped how the state understood itself. Like all great myths, it contained eternal truths, wrapped in specific circumstances: the power of individual courage to change institutions, the importance of moral conviction in the face of overwhelming odds, and the possibility of redemption even in the darkest circumstances. Young people facing their own struggles with injustice and oppression found inspiration in Mary's refusal to be silenced and Standing Bear's willingness to risk everything for a stranger's child. Their example proved that heroism wasn't the exclusive province of adults or soldiers. It was available to anyone who chose to act with courage and integrity when such action was needed most. The pocket watch that had started it all continued to tick in its museum case, its melody playing every hour on the hour. For visitors who came to learn about frontier justice and the triumph of truth over deception. The watch had become a symbol of how small actions could have enormous consequences. Ezra Whitman's decision to carry a musical timepiece had inadvertently provided the evidence needed to expose Burke's entire criminal network. And in the end, that was perhaps the deepest lesson of Mary Thompson's story, that individual choices mattered more than institutional power, that moral courage could overcome physical force, and that the bonds of human decency were stronger than the artificial divisions that evil men tried to create. The 13-year-old girl who had refused to lie for a murderer had grown into a woman whose influence shaped an entire region's development. The Lakota chief, who had risked his people's safety to save a stranger's child, had created a legacy of cooperation that lasted for generations. Together, they had proven that honor truly knew no boundaries of race or culture, and that the courage of the heart could overcome any obstacle when guided by wisdom and compassion. Their story lived on not just in museums and history books, but in the daily lives of people who chose understanding over fear, justice over convenience, and truth over comfortable lies. In every act of courage, large or small, their spirits lived again, proving that some friendships transcend death itself and that the bonds forged in the crucible of shared danger can reshape the world for the better. As the sun set over Devil's Canyon each evening, casting the same golden light that had illuminated Mary's rescue so many years before, the land itself seemed to remember the day when a Lakota chief and a pioneer girl had chosen honor over hatred, courage over fear, and hope over despair. Their legacy would endure as long as human beings valued justice cherished truth, and believed in the possibility of redemption, which is to say forever.